God, man. It's funny because it feels like once the roads going westbound to 163rd got restriped, it feels like the air was let out of the balloon a little bit, so to speak. And y'all were just like, oh, the roads were restriped.
And there was much rejoicing.
Yay!
You know, that type of thing.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets.
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the Grand Failure Beyond the Streets podcast. I'm your host, Rebekah Massie, from the Northwestern area of Surprise. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome aboard. I'm so glad that you're here. I strongly encourage you, if you have the chance, to go back and listen to my very first episode entitled Doomed from the Start, if you find the time. For those of you who are tuning in for the second time, I did want to let you know that I did decide to pivot a little bit from what my initial topics were going to be for this episode. Just in light of recent events, I still plan to go back and have an installment exposing some of those more shady aspects of our government agencies in the future. But this accident last week on February the 9th caused me to kind of change my course a little bit on this podcasting journey. Good news is that the episode's still going to feature some of the same elements that I had originally planned to bring up. So it's almost going to be like a little bit of a sneak peek for y'all. Anywho, let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so for today's episode, we're going to be diving deep into what I feel is an interesting topic that, looking back, I suppose I failed to mention what it is that we're going to be talking about today. The topic of the day is going to be accidents or crashes and the repercussions that we have in our area where people basically get trapped in or out of their own neighborhoods. Unfortunately, these are not just isolated incidences either. These are really semi-regular interruptions in our daily lives and often have far-reaching consequences that can easily go unnoticed if one isn't really taking the time to pay attention closely enough. Off the top of my head, a few big accidents were that fatal motorcycle accident, unfortunately, that took place in North Copper Canyon at Deer Valley and Williams. I want to say that was about August of 2022. Just back in December of last year, there was that little fender bender or what have you that took place the evening of December 5th that about 7 to 10 hours later caused the now infamous stoplight outage, and unfortunately the light out at 163rd Avenue and Grand was out for about 10 to 12 hours and just flashing red, which meant trains couldn't go anywhere. People in Asante really didn't have a way out of their neighborhood, and then those of us that were coming from elsewhere, say like Whitman, North Copper Canyon or anything, were still dealing with the stoplight outage, and it was a four-way stop, but it was just utter chaos at that particular intersection. I'm surprised there weren't any other accidents that day, to be honest. There's also countless others listed out there in various news outlets. I'll go ahead and link a few on the website after this episode premieres, just so that way you can kind of poke around, see what's there, and just kind of see how really it's not cyclical because it doesn't follow a pattern, of course, but it's definitely a little bit of a fear or apprehension that we kind of all existentially living out here. So in order to move forward in this topic, let's really start by addressing the proverbial elephant in the room, which is our limited access points. So what you have here is just thousands of homes crammed into an area with only one or two major access points to drive home, leave to go to work, leave to go to school, etc. So just to put it into perspective, picture this. You're driving home after a long day at work, only to find yourself just a couple short miles from kicking off your shoes, lounging on the couch. Because unfortunately you're stuck in gridlocked traffic. Frustrating, right? Kind of reminds me of that scene in Office Space where every time he changes lanes, it's like the other one starts going. That's what it's like out here. And unfortunately for us residents in Northwest Surprise, this scenario is all too familiar, and it's not just limited to our drives home from the office either. This sort of scenario happens while trying to commute to your job, trying to get the kids to school on time, receive critical healthcare treatments, you name it. If you need to leave the neighborhood, it really can and has happened at any time of day. So moving on, let's kind of look a little bit at the financial aspects of something like this. And yes, believe it or not, there are definitely financial impacts when a group of people or even an individual, right, can't make it into wherever or can't make it to whatever commitment they are supposed to do or be at, right? So think of missed hours from work, missed appointments for healthcare. So not only are you potentially missing the treatment, but many healthcare providers nowadays will have like late appointments or no-show fees, rescheduling, things of that sort. It's just, and there's a ton of other things that you could think of in this kind of fee or added cost category. You could honestly really even think about wear and tear on vehicles while idling in traffic, causing higher maintenance costs, fuel costs, things like that. But really, we should also be looking at the financial aspect from an infrastructure cost perspective as well. And what I mean by that, right, is looking at our city government, they like to plead for more funds through bonds, other special elections, or campaign for statewide ballot propositions like Prop 400, which is expiring at the end of this year, and then Prop 479 is what is going to be the extension of that half-a-cent sales tax on this coming November's ballot. And that's meant to continue that sales tax, which is supposed to be used towards funding roads statewide. Now, in case you missed it in my last episode, the city is actually responsible, in my opinion, a lot for this self-inflicted financial crises, so to speak, of no funds for the roads themselves. And what I mean by that, and again, I mentioned this last episode, today I'm going to kind of go in deeper to it and just what that impact looks like, right? So, since at least 2017, the City of Surprise has not charged a specific line item and by extension not collected any specifically allocated funding from the development impact fees, which is charged whenever a home or other sort of building is constructed in any part of the city. So hopefully that kind of clears up what I mean by self-inflicted. And what I mean by specific line item is that they will have things that go towards fire medical, police, other things like public works, water, trash, sewage, things of that sort. And there is like a general government fee section, whatever you want to call it. And then there is a pretty hefty chunk going to parks and recreation as well. But there's nothing specific for the roads. And again, that's going back since at least 2017. So really, this kind of feels like the political equivalent a little bit of shooting yourself in the foot, but it really doesn't stop there. So let's look at the crime and safety statistics and emergency response times in our area. So the closest fire station, which is FS 304, has an overall average response time, or ART for short, of 41 seconds longer at 7 minutes and 45 seconds than the next closest station to it. The other response time metric that they look at, which is called the 90% ART, meaning that they drop the bottom 5% of response times and the top 5% of response times, is still longer at 17 seconds longer than the next closest fire station. And that 90% response time comes in at 10 minutes and 51 seconds. Now, to put this into something a little bit more tangible, however you would like to phrase it here. So, fires, like scientifically this is proven, right? Fires double in size every 30 seconds. So you can see where pushing almost to that 20 seconds longer mark, right? You're going to have maybe about 60 to 80% larger of a fire than you did. At the average response time, right, of 41 seconds, that's definitely doubled in size at that point. The other thing to think of here is that during cardiac events, seconds truly matter. According to the American Heart Association, for every minute an individual is not given CPR in the event of cardiac arrest, their survival percentage or likelihood decreases by 10%. Meaning, if you have those calls taking over 10 minutes on average, 90% of their calls are answered in over 10 minutes. I don't feel like you have to be a math genius here to figure out that 10%, 10 times over, winds up taking that 100% expectancy and bringing you down to 0. Which, side note, if you're in this area and you don't know CPR, really, you should look into it anyways, regardless of where you live. But if you don't know CPR, you should absolutely learn how to give it. Even just hands-only CPR can double or triple a cardiac patient's survival rates while waiting for first responders to arrive. But again, most importantly here, if you take away nothing else, if EMS or the fire department or whomever, right, whatever emergency services are responding to a cardiopulmonary event, take 10 minutes or more to arrive, and nobody is giving that person CPR, they are likely going to die. They will no longer be here with us. And we, as residents in this area, should not at all accept that as the norm. Another couple of few shocking safety statistics here, just before we wrap up this first segment, is that really guys, it's really overwhelming when I look at the numbers here, but from 2022 to 2023 metrics, and mind you, the City of Surprise dashboard that I'm referencing here only has 2023 year to date as of September of last year, so it's really only like 3/4 of the year, right, that we're looking at these numbers, because apparently it hasn't been updated yet, which is a whole other ball of wax. But anyways, 2023 compared to 2022, Surprise had 300% more traffic fatalities in 2023. Other statistics like these were much, much higher. So misdemeanor DUIs were up by 22%. Aggravated DUIs are up by 133%. Extreme DUI by 32%. And then DUIs under the age of 21 is up by a shocking 233%. So I'm going to give you all a moment to let that sink in. 300% more fatalities. DUIs, hands and fists, above what they were last year. I'm going to give you a minute. Okay, so now that I've let that sink in, let's move on to exposing the action that the Surprise government has decided they are comfortable with pursuing while sitting comfortably in their chambers of City Hall. Oh wait, that's right. The only actions that they feel is in their best interest is to stand and do nothing outside of entertaining more and more development without the infrastructure to back it. Take, for instance, the northwest part of Surprise. You know, the one that we've been talking about, the one with all the terrible traffic. So currently Surprise in the 2023 to 2024 community profile, it's a document or like a portfolio that's supposed to help attract businesses to develop in Surprise. I don't know. It kind of reads like a
really crappy government version of a Tinder profile for a city.
Because it's just all about more and more development and how many people we have and so forth, trying to attract those businesses in here. But anyways, so take for instance that document, right? There's a grand total right now of 18,973 homes that are currently under construction. And that is specific to Northwest Surprise. right behind those 18, almost 19,000 homes that are currently under construction, there is another 12,361 homes planned to start building in this same area. Now, you may recall my comments from last episode and a little bit earlier in this episode about how the city has not been charging, collecting, or allocating any sort of dedicated funds that the developer impact fees are supposed to be allocated for or paid towards since as far back as at least 2017. So they're not charging anything specific as a line item saying this is roads and infrastructure. We have parks and rec, but nothing for roads and infrastructure. So to put this in perspective, and I believe I mentioned this briefly last time, so the city hired a company called Tischler Bice, a consultancy firm, to do a study for our area. And it's basically assessing the growth, the needs, things like that. And the study specifically was to realign developer impact fees and start those discussions of changing those. Anywho, so that's what the study is. That's what the goal is. In the study itself, our area is designated as the West area. Now, this West area, the proposal for it is to begin collecting from a developer for every single family home. So each and every single family home should be about $2,331 per home instead of the current $0. Again, that's $0, nothing. They don't collect anything now. Tischler Bice says they should be collecting over $2,300. The city right now collects nothing to go towards our roads, and we wonder why these roads are just so damn dangerous. So, I know some of you don't like math, and I know I already did math once, but just trust me, the math is good. So let's do some math here. Don't worry, there's not a pop quiz later, I promise. So let's take these two numbers that I mentioned a moment ago from homes under construction, planned homes to start being constructed. Add the 18,973 under construction, plus the 12,361 homes that are not yet under construction but will be soon. If you add them both together, you get 31,334 new houses, which should have development impact fees, again, according to Tischler Bice. So each of these 31,000 plus homes should be getting charged developer impact fees, should have certain amounts collected to be allocated towards catching up and maintaining our traffic infrastructure. If we take the 31,334 home figure that we just got and multiply that number of homes by the proposed development impact fees for our area, which again is $2,331 per home. I'm going to pause here a moment to tell y'all that when I just did the math on my calculator here, I literally, you can hear how my phone sounded, little calculator up on there. I threw it down on my desk because this number is so huge.
Huge.
If you will. So huge. Okay. All right. Jokes aside, because this is really not a laughing matter, even though that's my defense mechanism 99% of the time. So this is not a laughing matter. This number, 2331 times 31,334 is $73,039,554. Dollars. 73 million, over $73 million. 73. What the f***? Okay, I'm back, but I'm not. I need to take a break for a second. I'm so sorry, y'all. Here, let me just, I don't know, I'll listen to some Monty Python intermission music or something for a second while I go grab a beer or whatever from my fridge. Hold on.
Discover the pulse of Northwest Surprise, Arizona on this tell-all podcast entitled The Grand Failure, Beyond the Streets, as Rebekah aims to bring light to some of the darker aspects of government officials and agencies and the roles they have all played in this grand failure of ours. Stay connected to the heartbeat of Northwest Surprise, where the streets tell the story. You're listening to The Grand Failure, Beyond the Streets, a podcast about the ongoing public safety crisis in Surprise, Arizona.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm back. I just got too heated and I needed to take a step back for a second. I have more stuff to talk about by way of government inaction and, in my opinion, their willful, gross negligence. But I'm going to save it for a future installment. It's just too much right now. So let's move on to our next segment, where I'll let you hear directly from some of our neighbors out here and what it's like to experience this on a daily basis, so you don't just have to take my word for it. All right, without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share some of these conversations I've had with fellow neighbors. The first individual we're going to hear from is a gentleman by the name of Joe out of the Asante neighborhood. So I just have like a couple of questions, and obviously I know some of them we may or may not be able to answer because it's just a crappy situation. But I guess the first question I have is, how many accidents or road closures have you been impacted by since living out here?
Let's see. I would say minimally 4 accidents have affected between my wife and I. And then road closings, there was all the times, like there was that 2-week period where there was the railroad tracks, the gates closed, affected by all that.
Yeah.
And was definitely affected by, well, no, that was an accident. The accident that was on Grand the other day.
On Friday last week?
Yeah. But then also, just various backups when they weren't getting the timing of the lights right and trying to get out in the morning, maybe within 100 yards of Pat Tillman Boulevard, and then a train comes through, and just those situations. But I've seen more accidents as well. I mean, the other morning, I think it was last week too, right at Happy Valley and 163rd, first thing in the morning. And it was like 6:30 in the morning. Really bad accident. Quite a few I've seen been impacted by, like I said, probably about 4 or 5 of them.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that's probably about the same for me. I'm on the other side of the road in North Copper Canyon, but definitely same. Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned the accident last week. What about that light being out? What was that like when it was out in December? I think it was December 6th.
Oh yeah, when the lights that one, it was horrible. Thankfully, it didn't impact me to the point of missing anything. I had to use some ingenuity. No, I think I just had to ride that out. So basically now things like that make me have improper driving ideas, like going right on Grand, going to like Deer Valley, where it is that turnaround, or, where you go about a quarter of a mile down the road on Grand going west.
Yeah, that little access road or what have you, or Deer Valley for that matter. Okay.
Yeah. I just, I go down Grand, go to that first U-turn area and or that first left turn area and do a U-turn, which I know it could be dangerous. I mean, I trust my driving. I've been in one accident in my whole life back when I was a teenager. It wasn't my fault. I trust my driving ability, but I know, somebody's going to see me doing a U-turn and freak out and slam their brakes. I don't know what it causes other people to do, but I don't like the idea that I'm creating methods to just get to work on time. Something that happened to me last week too. I'm down at 163rd at Grand, and I was the first car before the railroad tracks. So, I wasn't going to stop on the track.
On the tracks, of course
which
not.
I've seen people do, which is stupid.
It is.
But I'm sitting there, and as soon as the light turned green, not one car, but 2 cars cut in front of me from the lane going straight. Like totally, as soon as the light turned green, even probably before, they just cut across the railroad tracks, cut in front of me, and went on Grand going east. So I mean, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm trying to figure out ways to maneuver around to get work on time within legal, but not the best things to do. But then here's people doing something totally idiotic, and
Of course.
thankfully, I'm not, I don't have roid rage, and it's not great circumstances that are being created due to the mess that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that covers one of my further questions down the line, which was, about behaviors that worsen those impacts. Because obviously it just kind of sounds like, not to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like when people are doing less than intelligent things on the road, it's just further compounding the already chaotic situation. Okay.
Exactly.
So when an accident does happen, I mean, how impactful is that to you and your family's daily routine?
Well, all of us leave work. My son leaves sometimes around 4 or 5 in the morning. My wife, she's a nurse, has to go to Del Webb. We moved out here for the convenience for her. It was really nice commuting to Del Webb. And what was usually took her, like sometimes it would take her only 7 minutes to get to work. It was beautiful. And now that's gone to 20, 21 minutes. If anything happens, she's going to get there late. I think just the traffic patterns, there's just more risk. I mean, I don't know if you're like this, but anytime there's an accident, whether it's like you see it on the Facebook page, you see it on the Nextdoor app, if you have the Citizens app, that'll alert you too. And if there's an accident anytime between 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning at 7 in the morning, I'm freaking out. I'm calling my wife, you okay? Calling my son, were you in that accident? Did you get past it? Whatever. And that's not cool. I mean, yeah, accidents can happen at any time. It's not just because we live in this area, but it's definitely magnified because we do live in this area. That's undue stress, I think, of moving out to a place that was supposed to be. And I know people will say like, well, you should have looked at the plans. These plans were, from 10 years ago or whatever. I get that now, but who really, I don't know. I've never had to do that. I've never lived in a city that was populating. I've lived in existing cities. So I know to look at future plans and what this was going to look like in 2025 or 2030. We moved out here because it was quiet. It was out of the way. And if the closest fries was Sun City, or Lake Pleasant and Happy Valley. And it was a sacrifice, but we felt it was worth it because of where we were moving to. Not only is it's not quite like 83rd, 89th and Bell Road or anything like that, but some of the stresses
probably on its way there though.
Well, you can see it happening, I mean, 163rd is going to be 6 lanes, going up and down. And then we're going to have 2,500 houses built to the north of us. And I don't know how many hundreds, if thousands of houses are going to get built right on the west side of Happy Valley and 163rd. I mean, that's a huge landmass, which just increases the potential for, accidents. And then, of course, we just have this one road in and ambulances getting in and such. I mean, it just amazes me how long it would take an ambulance to get from Del Webb to a place on like North Jomax, somewhere North Jomax and 178th or something like that, in that far northwest neighborhood. If the ambulance was going to turn on 163rd and have to navigate through that, instead of just pulling up to Grand and Jomax per se and shooting up there, I mean, literally it looks like maybe a mile and a half to get to like North Jomax from Grand, from where we are here at this intersection. It floors me every time I see that. Every time I drive down Grand coming from the west and I see the houses there, and they're not that far away. And it wouldn't take long to get to those homes from Grand if you just built a road.
No, it really wouldn't. And I think it's funny that you mentioned that because it's the tail end of Girl Scout cookie season, right? And so my daughter has been coming with me to deliver cookie orders, and even just from North Copper Canyon, Like to go over to Desert Oasis or some of the places in Asante, or like if we're delivering the Heritage, that neighborhood back there at the back part of Asante, it's bananas to me just trying to drive normal. Like you bring a really good point there. So, I mean, I guess with the road designs, I mean, how do you think that those factor into why these roads are closed every time there's an accident?
I mean, you just have, because Grand is so dense in its traffic. You got the trucks, you got the cars, of course. You got anybody coming from the greater Phoenix area that lives in Whitman, that lives out where our neighborhoods are populating. I mean, I've met a lot of people that do work in, even Tempe. This is that area. I totally think they've underestimated the traffic and where people are going. They all converge there. And anytime there's a traffic situation near Grand and 163rd, everything backs up. And if it's like on a school day and the accident happens before school, that's compounded even more, because now you got school buses, you got construction vehicles now. If anybody has to get out, so the other day, like my wife had to go to the doctor. I called her. Thankfully, I knew about the accident. I had to tell her to go down to Happy Valley to get the 303. I asked her how things were down there, and she said that was backed up because everybody was taking that road. And there's just one lane going on a right turn, onto Vistancia down to 303.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. There's just one lane to turn right. So that gets backed up immensely. I don't see it, like if there's an accident per se north of Pat Tillman, there's not a lot of holdups. Where you do see a holdup is on Happy Valley turning onto 163rd. Those poor people just get pushed back for, I've seen it back a half mile. Getting back to that, one time I was stuck and I had to creatively find a route through the neighborhood to get to 163rd. So I'm flying around and I'm thinking, man, neighbors can't want that. Just random vehicles driving through their neighborhood because they don't want to wait in line to go, to get left or right on Happy Valley onto 163rd.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel when because I'm in North Copper Canyon, right? And somebody's like, oh, take Citrus, take Norwich, take this, take that, right? And I'm like, that's great, but there's a lot of like little ranches that are sitting on a single acre, and I don't want to be going through there, not to mention the roads aren't super well maintained. Yeah. And then I still have to get on the Grand somehow, or dirt road it, or shoulder it, or something to try and get around it. So, I mean, since we're talking alternate routes, I mean, do you feel that there are any effective alternate routes, or?
I really don't. There are two ways to get out of this neighborhood.
For Asante, right? And by two ways, are you talking about Grand and 163rd and Happy Valley and 163rd?
Yeah. Yep. And a ton of people that have just moved here, and a whole more population that's moving here, and we're not ready for it. I don't care. The answer isn't wider lanes, because it still funnels down to 163rd and Grand. What would release a lot of that is, I think, easily Happy Valley and Grand intersection, Jomax and Grand intersection, because all that traffic, I mean, I would be tempted. If I was going west, I wouldn't go to 163rd. I'd go less than a block north to Jomax and take that out to Grand. It would alleviate some of the pressure. And then to hear that there isn't any plans in the near future for the 303 in Litchfield or the 303 in El Mirage, I mean, those were good ideas, but they're not coming. The houses are going to be sold and populated before a shovel goes in the dirt.
Yeah, for any of that roadway. You're exactly right. And all of that, when, I don't know if you were at Councilman Haney's December meeting or not, but all that MAG and ADOT were talking about with those two roadways, or those two potential freeway access points, is dependent on Prop 479 passing in November. And even still, it's not a guarantee. So I think you and I are aligned where really the issue is not, like, in part, right, the restriping or the expanding of lanes is going to help, but it's a Band-Aid. You need more access points. I mean, outside of creating more access points, is there anything that you feel like could be done differently when a road is closed? I don't see anything you can do. There's not even emergency access. I mean, believe me, I've driven up the 303. Like today,
traffic was down past the first bridge. I went to El Mirage to get onto the 303 to come home, all the way past Grand. And I look and I was like, okay, if I was to approach the Grand exit, get into the left lane, and there's a little gap in the fence line in the center, in the median, do a U-turn, cut across, and get off at the southbound 303 lane. In an emergency, I would do that. But driving back from El Mirage Road on the 303, it's all fenced. I mean, there is no access, no emergency access from this neighborhood. I know of a road, like even to the north, that you can't get to the 74.
Yeah, not from 163rd. You still have to go up Grand.
Yeah. You can't get. You have to take. Yeah, you have to get to the 303. There's some. I found an off road. And of course, if I needed to, but you're going off roading. Basically. So if you have a car and you're in an emergency situation, you're screwed. You just are screwed. Let me think. There was Vistancia, but that all funnels. Well, now they have more exits from Vistancia onto the 303. There's the Joe Max exit. There's, of course, the Happy Valley one or by the Mormon Temple. And then there's two other exits there. But to access that, if you don't want to take Happy Valley, you got to go off-roading again, go by the water treatment plant. I don't know if you know about that, but Vistancia, there's a water treatment.
I've heard of it. I've heard whispers on Facebook and Nextdoor and whatnot, kind of like, people over in my neck of the woods talk about 195th or like 243rd, I think it is. And I'm like, that's cute, but those are practically dirt roads. I'm not taking my Honda Pilot on that.
Exactly. So, that's the thing. These accidents, I mean, I was in the military. I always have a plan. If there's no way out, you adapt. So I have my routes in mind, but to the average person, they're just stuck.
Right. And then you also have to factor in that the average person, like you said, right, like not everybody has a car that's capable of 4-wheel drive. And even if they did, is it really worth the wear and tear on your vehicle?
Yeah. Well, in an emergency situation, but like if I was, worst case scenario, there's an emergency at my home. I've got to take someone to the hospital. And I know there's a situation down Grand and 163rd and traffic's backed up. I mean, you aren't going to get an ambulance coming out this way because that's going to take a long time. Maybe the firefighters down the road can treat you. I don't know what services they offer or if they're deployed, in case like a 911 call. But, I would, by any means necessary, I would take a loved one or someone in need to the hospital. I mean, if I had to ram down a fence, I would, it just is what it is. But I don't like
defenders be damned, right? It doesn't matter,
I mean, you could, the on Grand, right before the little canal, there's that bridge that people like to go off. They used to, I guess police are on it more. I mean, that's another way, but it's not ways that people want anybody to take, of course.
Yeah, I usually call that the Dukes of Hazzard style way of getting into Asante.
Yeah, and I was so tempted to do it sometimes. And I'm thankful for the restriping. I am thankful for the little steps of progress, but it's like if you had cancer and your doctor said, "Hey, we're going to remove the tumor." You got, the tumor's about the size of a grapefruit and we're going to take off 1/4 of it. You'd be like, Take the tumor out, take the whole tumor out as fast as you can. No. We're just going to take 1/4 of it now. And a few months later, we're going to take another one. What I thought was very insulting was this, that all the conversation, the meetings and such that we've had, the council meetings that we've had with Nick Haney at the Asante Library, the complaints on Facebook and all that, the pushing for something to happen, and there was no answers, there was no solutions, proposition this, proposition that's got to pass. And literally it took 5 hours for them to restripe 163rd.
Right. And I don't feel like, and this may be me through my lens, right? But I don't feel like until Joe Mansour held that community meeting, and then until I connected with him, launched the petition and the site, and there was just that huge collective amount of pressure in a very, very short amount of time, that's what ultimately pushed ADOT to realign their timeframes.
Right.
And then the city's claiming it's a victory. And I'm like, that's cute. You didn't do anything.
Yeah. I get it. That's politics.
So, Joe is right. This is a classic case of politics getting in the way. But you know what? Call me crazy. I don't think that politics should be getting in the way of having safe roads, or hell, even residents getting access to healthcare when they have to travel to appointments, or even in the best case of scenarios, be lucky enough to have a doctor that makes a house call to care for their patient's needs. The other resident I met with, also from Asante, is a gentleman by the name of Dean, and we'll hear from him how him, family, and their medical care have been impacted by these roads and our terrible traffic situations. So I guess before I get into the couple of questions that I have, how long have you and your family lived out this way in Surprise?
We moved out here in July of 2018.
Okay, so a few
Oh,
years and really.
I'm sorry, 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay, so still before most of the boom out here, for sure.
Actually, when we moved into Asante, we were the only two houses on our block, and there wasn't another house for 3 blocks. So it was me and my neighbor, and there was no other houses for 3 blocks.
That sounds about right. Okay, yeah, so definitely before the boom, for sure. So since moving in, I mean, ballpark, how many accidents or road closures do you feel like you've been in or impacted by?
At least a dozen.
Yeah, so a dozen since mid 2019.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that puts us at what, 3 or 4 a year?
That's about right.
Yeah, I mean, now we're up to like 3 or 4 in the last week, but
yeah. So my wife has she worked over in Scottsdale for a long time, and she dealt with traffic getting in and out of the neighborhood. She was having to struggle with that for the first few years. I've worked from home since like 2015, so hasn't really been anything that's really impacted me. And then of course COVID hit, and she started working from home, and she's been working from home ever since. So I think our biggest concern, with closures and things like that is my mother. We bought one of the next gen homes. My mom is 81. She has heart disease and renal failure and those types of things, and we struggle with her health care. And there's 2 pieces to that. First off, we do take her to appointments and so on, but her personal doctor actually comes out to see her at the house, so she doesn't have to go into those environments where she could get sick from something.
well,
So
yeah, with renal failure, I mean, that's their kidneys and that filters out toxins. So clearly health is
yes.
at risk. And I don't know if she's on dialysis or anything, but I know I've had family members that have been on that, and your immunity
Well,
is
we've been able to
garbage.
avoid the dialysis, so
That's good.
we've been really good with her, and she's getting better. But her we really like that her family doctor comes out and sees her at the house here. But there's been times that they've had to move appointments and things like that because they're not able to make it out. They get stuck in traffic, and they really have other patients to see as well. So they've had to call us and say, look, we're going to have to postpone this till tomorrow, or whatever it is.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because that preventative care is so crucial when you're already dealing with underlying health concerns, for sure.
So, and I hear a lot of people say, here's the thing. It's not a big deal. We now have another way out of the neighborhood. And they're talking about Happy Valley. Happy Valley, by the way, is 24 minutes out of the way. It takes
Yeah.
24 minutes for us to go from the Loop 303 in Grand all the way back into our house, when it would take us just 2 minutes if we were able to come down Grand and go up 163rd. So I don't really agree with that. We actually had, my wife and I went to an event a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. We had a friend of ours that left that event maybe 10 minutes before we did. And then we left the house, and our friend lives over here off of Grand on Deer Valley. So
Okay, that's where I'm at.
yeah, she's past 163rd, and then we're Grand and Deer Valley. And we get off the Loop 303 northbound, and there was a bunch of traffic right there, and they let us turn in towards 163rd. So we turned off of the 303 onto Grand, and traffic was just stopped. We weren't moving. We were moving very, very slow. We were there for 45 minutes before we made it down to the other side of the freeway.
And when was this?
This is a couple of years ago, and it was late at night. I think it was around midnight. And they were forcing cars to either get back on the freeway or turn around. So we actually were able to make it turn around and come back and get on the 303 northbound again. And we went up to Happy Valley and came in that way. Of course, it was an hour and 15 minutes by the time we got home. And we were calling our friend to make sure she wasn't involved in whatever this was. It was an accident at 163rd. I don't know if it was a fatality or what, but they had closed both directions of Grant at that point. And so she was okay. It must have just happened right after she went through there, because she was able to make it home. And then we got home, like I said, about an hour and 20 minutes later.
Yeah. Do you know if this, like, what month this was?
It was late at night. I believe it was, I know it was after 11. It was probably closer to midnight. And I think it was in October. I'd have to go back and look at our calendar to see when we had that event.
I'm just curious, because I mean, if it took you over an hour and 15 additional minutes, like, obviously you can shoot me a message and get back to me on that one, but I just like piecing together timelines and anecdotal stuff for sure. And so I know you kind of answered a couple of my next questions as far as how many you've been, but in impacting your daily routine. So obviously mom's medical stuff, what other impacts do the accidents or road closures have to your daily life?
What's really terrible is we don't know when things are going to happen, and so we have to plan ahead. If my mom has an appointment or I have an appointment and we need to go out of the neighborhood, we have to put that buffer in there. The one morning where the lights were not working, and I was told that was because of an accident, but the lights weren't working. I went down Pat Tillman. I had an appointment, and I was going to be 20 or 30 minutes early because I was planning on traffic being there. But I wasn't planning on the traffic being as bad as it was. And so, I gave myself time to, overcome the traffic issues getting to my appointment, which was down in Sun City. I mean, it wasn't far away.
Yeah, probably like 20 minutes down the road.
Yeah. And so I go ahead of time and then find out that the lights are out, and it's basically a 4-way stop down there. And I was actually 14 minutes late, and they told me if I had been one more minute late, I would have had to pay $100 no-show fee, or they would see me again. And I was like, that's just not acceptable. Why weren't there police officers there directing traffic? I don't understand.
Yeah.
That.
So I've been trying to piece together a timeline for that whole December 6th piece of it, and I have some information from Surprise PD that I got out of a Freedom of Information or FOIA request. I've tried in the past to get other things from ADOT, and they're not super forthcoming. To be honest, they've been like, if we have the information, if we give it to you. So I don't necessarily know if I'm going to get a timeline. And from like Eric Boyles, who's the transportation director at City of Surprise, he hasn't even really been able to get a timeline. And so I don't even know if I want to waste my breath. I might just file a record for it, and at least I have the paper trail for it. But from what I have from the City of Surprise, so there was an accident, I guess. Somebody hit, I don't know if it was like the electrical box or something that was connected to it. And I think 7 or 8, 9 o'clock at night, the night before. So on the 5th, there was no issues, because I remember driving that light later that evening and there were no issues. And sometime around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, the light started flashing or was completely out. And that's when Surprise PD was notified, and they notified DPS, because obviously the 60 is a state highway and run by ADOT, and DPS is who the patrol is. Anything that Surprise PD is an agency assist is what they designate it as.
Yes.
I.e. they don't run control on it. They're just there for boots on the ground support sort of thing. DPS didn't actually show up on scene until I want to say like 10:30 or 11, and then the light was fixed right around the noon hour. And that's why I've been trying to push or try and get information from City of Surprise, because the fact that the light was out, like, I mean, I work IT projects, right? And I know that if we have an outage where we take somebody's ability to process transactions, like credit card transactions for my employer, we're supposed to resolve that outage. I don't know what the official outage is, but usually we try to. Yeah, like the SLA is usually like, if we can get it in under 2 hours, great. If not, under 4 is really where most of them are resolved in, unless the like carriers like AT&T or Verizon are involved for an MPLS circuit or something. Then obviously you have to hurdle acts into those types of bridges, but for the fact, like 10 to 12 hours is just bananas that's an SLA. And I don't think that the city of Surprise was ever given an SLA. So supposedly the cops that were out there, some of the DPS officers were just like sitting in their vehicles. City of Surprise finally had to allegedly dispatch people to navigate some of that because citizens were trying to do it. And then the DPS guy who was sitting there, I don't know, eating donuts or whatever in his car, yelled at people to get out of the intersection, which I get, it's a safety concern, but I mean, it kind of becomes, at least in my mind, I'd be like, see something, say something. You know what I mean? Somebody out there directing traffic even poorly is better than a free-for-all. Certainly.
Yeah, and there was definitely a high risk for another accident. I also work in IT security. I understand the whole SLA thing. I don't like to say anything negative about law enforcement unless it's actually warranted. My daughter was a sheriff deputy for the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for several years. She has now moved back east, and she's a police officer back there. On the East Coast now, and I worked for the sheriff's office as a volunteer 20 years ago, and so I understand what law enforcement officers go through. I understand that they get their orders from their superiors, and sometimes they're told, nope, this is what we're going to do. I don't blame the officers that were out there. I understand that they were dealing with what they were dealt with this issue, and they were doing the best they could. I do have a concern with the city overall, the city of Surprise. Why would they take police officers and put them down at Pat Tillman to close 163rd at Pat Tillman, or up at Happy Valley? Originally, they closed it at Happy Valley, from what I understand.
Yeah, because they trapped you guys.
Yep. So parents were complaining that they couldn't get their kids over here to Asante Prep. So instead of closing it at Happy Valley, they broke that down and they took it down to Pat Tillman and broke it, closed it there. That's just wrong. We were trapped in our neighborhood. Now, it didn't affect me because I wasn't out that day. I was out earlier in the morning, but I came back in before all that happened. But that was just not. What do we do? I mean,
Yeah,
and what happens with
you guys what they did to us when there was that crash last week between Deer Valley and 163rd? They were routing all the traffic off the 60 down Deer Valley onto that little frontage road and then out at 163rd to bypass the two semis and then I think one other personal vehicle that had jackknifed into each other. And so I don't know how familiar you are or how often you visit your friend over in North Copper Canyon, but it was very much the same where we had traffic backed up like all the way along Deer Valley, probably practically to Copper Park back off 183rd. And then I live off of Williams, and Williams was backed up as far back as it can go where it dumps out at Citrus.
Yeah, I really think that we need to start pushing. Well, first off, the things that they're doing right now, the dual turn lane, the arrow, those things have made a big impact and a big change over here. We're not seeing as much traffic as we used to see. Don't get me wrong, there's still traffic here, but it's not as terrible as it was. So they've made some good progress with the little things that they've changed. But my concern right now is doesn't affect my neighborhood. It affects your neighborhood. Is the speed limit coming down Grand and the US 60 right there at Deer Valley is just too high.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's way too high. And the thing is, that gentleman who lost his son there at that intersection, I feel for him and his family. I think that somebody needs to wake up and realize that speed limit has to be dropped coming into town, basically. And it's not. It's high, and those, like the accident last week, we saw that, and then on the same day, I don't know if you saw, I posted it, getting on the 303 southbound, and we just got on and we just passed. Actually, we were right at that. Is it Mountain View? That's that first bridge over there, and my dash cam caught an accident that happened on the other side of the freeway. And those cars were all backed up to get off at Grand. And so it was going down. Those cars had all backed up going off at Grand. And all we saw was there was two semis and at least two cars involved. And they were coming up there at, 60 miles an hour and couldn't stop in time for that traffic that was stopped in that lane and ended up, crashing into each other. So same thing over here on Grand and Deer Valley. It's a major concern. We need to bring that traffic speed down so that people have more of an opportunity to respond when they see that, there's just traffic sitting there. They're not able to move.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're organically answered or led into some of them, because I know you talked about the alternative route of Happy Valley. It sounds like you're not really in favor of it and don't feel that it's effective. Because one of my questions was, what alternate routes, if any, do you find effective? And then how effective do you feel that they are? I mean, I'm in the camp I don't really feel like there's any effective alternative routes. How do you feel, Dean?
Well, I don't know when they opened Happy Valley. I don't remember. It's been probably a year, maybe a little bit more, but it's a single lane in each direction. And once you get here to 163rd at Happy Valley, there's no light. And there's traffic going up 100 down 163rd, and trying to get out of there is quite difficult, because you're crossing the single lane, but you also have to cross the lanes on the other side. And so traffic backs up down Happy Valley quite a ways.
Like a mile, I feel like.
Well, we've learned if we have to come in that way and traffic is backing up, it's that time of day that traffic's going to back up. We turn on 147 to go up to Joe Max, which makes it even further of a trip for us. And then we bring Joe Max down because there's a light at 163rd and Joe Max, and it makes it a lot easier for us to make that left-hand turn to get on to 163rd. If we're at Happy Valley, we have to make that left-hand turn. It's a very difficult, and traffic's flying up and down the road. Yeah. It's crazy.
Stoplight. So, I mean, I guess from a road design perspective, I mean, how do you feel that contributes, if anything, to the duration of any road closures or alternate routes following some sort of incident, whether it's a closure, crash, accident, what have you?
I honestly, if I hear there's a closure out there, I just try to stay home. I really don't want to get involved and get out there and have to sit in traffic. But and there's times we've actually canceled an appointment. If we have an appointment somewhere and we know that there's an accident out there and there's a closure, we just postpone the appointment to another time. But I don't think that Happy Valley is a good alternative. It's actually not even an okay alternative, because it's only one lane each direction, and you take all the cars that go at 163rd and Grand and start sending them down Happy Valley, and you're dealing with more of a traffic issue.
Yeah, it's kind of like when they put us all on that little podink frontage road, if you can even call it that, or some of the people over here in North Copper Canyon will be like, oh, go down 185th or go down 243rd past the dump. I'm like, neither of those are particularly well paved. Some of it's completely unpaved. Like, I'm not going off-roading in my Honda SUV, and I really don't feel like taking my Dodge truck out there and potentially getting it stuck because it's a heavy sucker,
Exactly. Yeah.
Pass. So I know you said you don't want to necessarily talk poorly about law enforcement officers, and that's not my goal either. I don't necessarily. I'm of the mindset of there's good cops, there's bad cops, and unfortunately the bad cops give the good cops a bad name, basically.
That's true.
But what do you feel just overall could be done differently during any type of road closure?
Well, I really think on the day that they closed 163rd at Pat Tillman, those officers could have been used down at the intersection. I understand it's not their jurisdiction. It's really, DPS, but they do agency assist all the time. In a situation like that, it's the City of Surprises citizens that were in danger of using that intersection when it's a four-way stop, and you're talking 3 lanes and one way, or 2 lanes one way and 2 lanes the other. It's a very difficult intersection to manually direct traffic. I get it. And if there was 1 or 2 DPS officers out there, that wouldn't have been enough. An intersection that size would take at least 6 officers to do it safely. And so I understand that DPS may not have had that kind of staffing available to do that. They have fewer staff in a particular area than other agencies. The City of Surprise, they would have had enough officers to do it. They could have brought in the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office could have brought 1 or 2 people out, and then they could have directed traffic together.
Yeah,
that's just my personal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and bring them in other agencies. I don't know what took so long to repair the equipment. It could have been, I don't know. I don't know what was wrong with it, or
I don't think anybody's gotten an answer, to be honest, other than that there was some sort of hardware failure. Okay, before we wrap up this second installment of the Grand Failure podcast, I'd like to talk about, in my final segment today, really where we go from here, how we move forward and how we can seek and truly can and will be able to institute real, honest to God change in our city. All right, first things first, as a community, we need to show our strength in numbers. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Multiple people having the courage to stand up or even just show up in support of what is right and speak out is far, far more impactful than one or two loud voices speaking for the masses, right? So take, for instance, the most recent Planning and Zoning Commission meeting this past Thursday, February 15th. Now, there was a rezoning application from a developer who claimed to have over 150 letters of support from residents in the area wanting and in support of these commercial properties, such as like a neighborhood store, something like an Aldi was even mentioned, to go in, as well as over 475 apartments. So again, commercial development, think Aldi, and 475 apartments right smack dab next to it at the corner of 163rd Avenue and Joe Max Road. Yeah, that corner, the northeastern side actually, not the Dollar General side, so the northeastern side, right by all of those rural residential areas, even the folks that are under the county jurisdiction. You know, those people with over an acre of land, some of them 2.5 acres of land with horses, primarily on well water, right? Mind you, this attorney representing this developer even openly admitted on the record at this planning and zoning meeting, right, that they allegedly, when he's describing the canvassing, right, they only went to the Desert Oasis neighborhoods, which are across, so not even the next door neighbors, but the people that live across the street, across 163rd Avenue, not right next to those proposed sites where all of this junk would go in, right, if he got his way. He stated they didn't canvass the rural neighborhoods or residents that would be getting all of these next door neighbors again, right? We didn't question the rural neighborhoods, not the next door neighbors. We asked the guy across the street. It should be fine, right? So didn't ask the next door neighbors, asked the people across the street. So again, 150 supporters in Desert Oasis, this guy is claiming. I know that the rural folks don't want it, right? Desert Oasis people probably don't want the traffic. I know Asante folks definitely don't want the traffic further down 163rd, right? Now, I am of firm belief, I am firmly in the camp of the only reason why the Planning and Zoning Commission did not vote to approve this rezoning request on Thursday night was due to the 5 or so of us neighbors that showed up, myself included. We showed up, we spoke out, we said no, listed the many reasons why adding more traffic is going to make the roads even less safe than they are today. So we all showed up, 5 of us went, took turns, took our 3 minutes, spoke out. Now, I bring this up because even though P&Z denied it, they did not approve the rezone, it's ultimately still up to the council. City council has the final say on the rezoning application, right? And all of the others just like it in the pipeline or to be submitted into the pipeline in the future, right? Needless to say, city council still has final say. If we show up, we fill city hall. I currently have taken the liberty to start this sign-up sheet circulating via Google Forms. You can find it also on the grandfailure.site. Some of the recent Facebook posts I've made have had it. But this sign-up sheet, whenever I get a date, I will send all of that out, put it on blast. So the purpose of this, right, is that we cannot idly stand by any longer. We need to organize. We need to act. This year is also an election year. Scary, I know, right? A lot of seats are up for election, but it's true. So outside of the state level and the federal level elections, which are also very, very important, to be honest, things that change on a federal level or things that change on a whole state level, typically it's not as big of an impact, right? Because everybody's impacted. So outside of those bigger elections, these local government elections are really important. So that means that your city council seats that are up for election are critical. The mayoral race. That mayoral race is critical, and right now, Councilwoman Allie Klein, she is not running for re-election in her city council seat. She is, however, running in the mayoral race, and the candidates that were in the race or potentially in the race against Allie, she's now got an uncontested election. So uncontested, right? And for those of you who don't know, if you don't get on the ballot, it doesn't mean you can't run. You can still potentially be eligible to run, but you would just be a write-in candidate. And write-in candidates don't win because they're not, like, I would have to remember to vote for Tony Stark, right, for mayor if he were running. Not that Iron Man needs to, well, maybe he'd fix the roads. But, so not only is this upcoming election important, right, but so is using our legal rights to fight for safer roads. I mentioned last episode that I'd like to see some of those alternate ways out of the neighborhoods. So hopefully we can get some of those implemented. Get on board that train and leave this hot mess express that we have right now in the station that we're all currently stuck aboard. Leave it in the dust, get on a different train, get different points of access and get different arterial roads developed, right? Widened, whatever. If we can get all of that, the only other thing that I can think of for us to do is, aside from advocating for solutions, aside from preventing things that should not go in here until the infrastructure is completed or caught up, right? The last piece of the puzzle, I think, this is a brand new section up at the top of the grandfailure.site, so that little navigation bar. This is something that I don't think is an easy decision, and that I think it's a more extreme reaction, but desperate times, desperate measures, and all of that, right? Top of the website, right, there is a section now for couple of pieces of information, right? So there's a State of Arizona risk management, City of Surprise has a risk management division, and there's links to both of those. And within those pages, but I've also linked them in the same section on the site, right? It has there's a couple of different claim forms for the State of Arizona. One is automobile specific, and the other one is just general liability claims. City of Surprise just has one claim form for everything. And as a private citizen, if there is some sort of negligence or some sort of event that could have been prevented by the government acting in a different way, there is legal precedent to have the at-fault party, in this case the government entity, held liable. And that's just based on not only any of the city municipal codes, as far as like street stipulations and whatnot, but at the state level, right, in our Arizona revised statutes, Title 28 for transportation. And then federally, there's actually some things so specific, looking at you, ADOT, for the 303 and the 60. So that is the Federal Highway Safety Act for those items. So if there's something that should have been done, you did everything you could reasonably to avoid said accident or what have you. And then because there's a giant pothole the size of Montana in there, all of your rims on your vehicle fell off because there was nowhere for you to go in this giant Grand Canyon shaped pothole, right? You can file a claim. You can try to hold the government entity responsible fiscally, okay? Not saying you're going to win a bunch of money, not saying you're going to get any sort of settlement, right? But at the very least, you've become a nuisance by way of paperwork that they have to file out and prove why they are not liable, right? So between all of that, right, really, we got to show up, we got to tell them no. We got to use our votes and use our voices to try and advocate, not only for better representation in the government, right, but also said it at that resident meeting that Mr. Mansour held back in November at the library. I said it then, right? I said it's about damn time we hit them where it hurts. Their fucking pocketbooks. Okay, well, I suppose it's about time we wrap up this episode, so let's go ahead and recap what we've discussed here today. Ultimately, the roads are unsafe and residents feel trapped every time there's an accident. And just for those keeping score, there's been about 3 or 4 accidents just in the last week and a half in this area, right? So in order to alleviate the traffic, ultimately, the solution must include more points of access. And basically what we mean by more points of access, we need more than one way in or out of our neighborhood, okay? More than one way. The city should have had the foresight for all of this growth when they allowed all of these rezoning applications and all of these building permits to be approved in the first place. The city should have been collecting money for the roads and the infrastructure from those development impact fees. The city should have been collecting money for the roads and infrastructure from the development impact fees and kept the pace with all housing boom out here in Northwest Surprise, but they didn't. They didn't keep up with the boom. Instead, they chose to willfully ignore the boom and ignore the needs of their constituents and sit in their cushy office chairs far away from the traffic nightmare, out of sight, out of mind. So it's high past time that we fight back and that we tell them enough is enough. We need to devise a plan for the election this year, right? And hell, if you're up for it, run for office. Side note, if you are really interested, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email at thegrandfailureaz@gmail.com. So thegrandfailureaz@gmail.com. And I can connect you with some of the local PACs in the area if you don't know who some of those organizations are. And above all else, right, remember that there's strength in numbers. So even if you can't run, don't want to run, not your thing, right? Even just showing up and being present, certainly showing up and speaking out. There's strength in numbers. And I ask for those of you all to remember something that I'm now going to dub as the 5 S's. And those are sign the petition, spread the information, stay tuned for updates, show up to the meetings, and speak out against this madness. This is Rebekah Massie signing off for the Grand Failure Podcast. Thanks.
You're listening to The Grand Failure Beyond the Streets, a podcast about the ongoing public safety crisis in Surprise, Arizona.
The Grand Failure Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Rebekah Massie. Jonathan Perry is credited with the voiceover and announcement work. I'd like to thank Spotify for podcasters as the hosting and distribution platform, and the folks over at Audacity with their open source software that made production and editing of this podcast possible. Any graphics, logos, or artwork used to identify or promote the podcast were created by Rebekah Massie using Canva software. Sound effects and music provided courtesy of freesound.org, a website that offers royalty-free Community Commons licenses for a variety of soundbites, songs, and effects. News sources will be linked on the webpage dedicated to the Grand Failure Podcast on thegrandfailure.site. That's thegrandfailure.site. The sources for today's episode come from a variety of news outlets: City of Surprise public record requests, reports, council sessions, and other meetings, along with their meeting minutes, in addition to other publications made available by the City of Surprise. Interviews and commentary will be provided voluntarily by 2 fellow North Surprise residents in the Asante development. Those individuals were once again Joe and Dean, and I thank them for their contributions to this episode of the Grand Failure Podcast. I'd also like to thank the local political action committee, or PAC, by the name of Voice of Surprise, for their partnership in my efforts on this podcast, as well as give a quick shout out and thank you to my husband Brian Massie, who has graciously put up with all of my work on this endeavor. Thank you all for your time, and all of the podcast credits, details, and information can be found on the website, thegrandfailure.site.